Welcome to the Iron Brew podcast. Brad Mel, Matt Blanchard on this one. It's Match Day Live. It's also another Derby Day Live. It comes around nice and fast, doesn't it? Joining us on this one, we've got former director Simon Elliott. So, Simon, welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you, and good afternoon. And good afternoon to, I'm sure, all those nervous, butterfly-ridden Scunthorpe United fans today.
Let's talk about that. I mean, how are you feeling about the Grimsby game? Considering, as I say, it's come round quite quickly. We only played them about a month ago. Obviously, the performance there, it was terrible. I'm sure you've been watching Scunthorpe United. You'll have seen that one. What have you made of it recently?
It's been difficult to watch, quite honestly. I think a lot of us just want to see the players putting everything they've got into it and challenging and shooting and taking chances. And I think we understand the situation with with COVID and no supporters, but that's exactly the same for everybody else. The worrying thing is that we're not turning promised performances into wins and points against the teams around the bottom. And we're not putting particularly strong performances in either. And although we're only losing 1-0, you look at it and think, where could we have been in the league if we just had that little bit of experience that, we'd had maybe Kevin Van Veen in the side and Harrison McGahey a bit more regularly. Where could we be? We'd certainly be mid-table and if not pushing for the playoff. So I'm just wondering when that switch is going to be switched and some of these performances like we put in against Harrogate when we got 5, we're going to see some of that again. We've played a lot of the bottom teams twice in a number of instances, and we've got 12 points against the bottom half teams and we've got 11 points against the top half teams, but we've played more of the bottom half teams. So we've got to start turning these performances into wins, because the season, yes, Mr. Swan says we've only got halfway through the season, but it's gone very quick, and in the flash of an eye the second half's going to have gone and the season's going to have finished, and we're going to be looking back and wondering what happened.
We're obviously playing Grimsby again today, and you think back to the game at their spot last month. We didn't really turn up, did we? And I think Neil Cox after the game said that he'd maybe not got into the players. He'd not been hyping the game up as much as he maybe could have done. Do you think there'll be a shift this time, given we're at home and obviously it was such a poor performance? I think the fans are expecting a lot better today.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, I've been chatting to a couple of the players not on football matters, actually, on a couple of other things. And it certainly seems that the message has got home. I think Neil probably was a little bit embarrassed at the lack of us turning up. I think the only thing we also need to be conscious of is that Grimsby have also got a new manager who was also ex-Scunthorpe and has got something to prove against us. So he'll have his team fired up more so than Grimsby were fired up for that first game. So, it could be fireworks, actually, but I'm just hoping that we close down, that we've got a good team. We've got an attacking team. We've got some people who have got the opportunity to make a bit of a name for themselves, and I've said to somebody earlier on today that, you look at Alex Calvo-Garcia, a foreigner that's become a bit of a cult hero. Kevin Van Veen, when he scored against Grimsby and before, a bit of a cult hero. Is it the day for Caracan to become our next foreign sort of superstar? And I think somebody that's probably unexpected could be a hero today.
Yeah, well, you're talking about the team there. I think we'll just run through it now, because obviously, remember the Barrow game last time, we were talking about how, in the first half at least, we didn't even create anything. So it does seem a little bit more attacking than that. But we've got Howard, Clark, Taft, Honoré, Gilead, Loft, Issa, Green, Beeson, Caracan, and then O'Malley as well. So, there's a few players in there to look out for. There's a few ways this line could go. It could be a 4-4-2. It could maybe outplay as a 3. There's definitely attacking players. With Green's in there, Issa's in there, Gilead's there. Hopefully this time we'll see a bit more of an attacking intent that I think's been missing the last couple of games.
It certainly looks exciting. I mean, I think if you were to ask most of the supporters, assuming Kevin Van Veen wasn't going to be there, who we'd put on the pitch to sort of create a bit of flair and a little bit of excitement, they would be the players you probably put on the pitch. I think the likes of Issa, though, need to realise they've got to defend as well as go forward. And when they haven't got the ball, they've got equally as much to do. And I think, we have put a lot of pressure on the back four in the last few weeks by not tracking back and not doing enough in midfield. So long as they are prepared to track back and do as much when they haven't got the ball, I'm quite excited by the lineup. I think the important thing is we get some service to Loft. A lot of supporters, quite rightly, have been a little bit critical of him, but the service hasn't been fantastic. So hopefully, he might get a couple of chances today and prove all the doubters wrong. But with Issa, with Green, with Gilead, with Caracan, we've got some players that can turn a game, and hopefully that will be shown in the first 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, I'd agree with that about Loft. I think he has been under fire, if you like, and I think he was obviously a doubt coming into this game. But you look at it, and you were looking at kind of the other options we had available. Obviously, Turan's injured. Kev's not quite ready. Olamola's a couple of weeks off. So I think it was key really that he was fit, just to give us that kind of focal point up front. And I think you're right. I think we do need to get some support. We get players in and around him. Obviously, Issa and Green as well. And I think with Green, I think we need to see a little bit more from him when he starts a game, because I think he's been great when he's made substitute appearances. He's kind of used his pace. He's took players on. I think at Barrow he kind of created a couple of chances, but there was just no one in the middle. So it'll just be nice if he can really take the game to Grimsby from the start. He's got a lot of pace, and I think that's really what you need at this level. I think if you've got pace, you'll go quite far, and I don't think we've utilised it enough. So hopefully he's kind of playing off Loft, and we can see that today. But overall, I think you're right. I think it's probably the best team we could put out with the players we've got available. And obviously, it's nice to see Hallam on the bench as well, because I think we've seen little flashes from him, but I think obviously his injuries have kind of got the better of him during his time here. But I think if we can get him fit as well, he's another option that could potentially play off Loft in that kind of role, the number 10 role, and he can create as well, quite a clever player. So I'd like to see him have a bit of a run if he can get fit. I think that would be nice. But also O'Malley, I think good to see him back. I know it was obviously sort of come back in by default really with Brown being suspended, but I think he can give us a lot in terms of delivery into the box. I think his delivery's been good on the whole since he's come into the side. And he can find himself really unlucky that he's been dropped the last couple of weeks. But I think hopefully he'll come back in today. He'll be fresh, and hopefully he can give Loft some service, and we score a few goals.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. I think the other important thing as well, there's Grimsby may double up on Issa, and if they double up on Issa from the beginning, that might leave some spaces for some other creative players to do something a little bit special. So that might actually be a positive one as well, given those opportunities. But I really do think that they are some young lads, and we do still need, I think, another striker. Hopefully, it's going to be before the window closes. But it's a shame we haven't got one in quickly. Obviously, something's gone on in the background, because I think both Mr. Swan and Neil Cox were seeming pretty confident, and it wasn't just Kevin Van Veen that was the new striker. They were talking to somebody else, and either the club have decided that they don't want to release him, or the players decided he doesn't want to come to Scunny. But I think the supporters need to realise there's an awful lot of work goes on behind the scenes. There's so many phone calls get made, so many agents are promising the world with their players, and you feel for at this time you feel for the managers, you feel for the management of the club in trying to sort the wheat out from the chaff. And right now they're still obviously balancing the books with the ceiling that they're allowed to go to, but players are still wanting to earn sort of silly money, so they've got to get players out. Obviously the players that we used to get out went on to bigger and better things because they were good players, and we're now a bit more reliant upon our players going into non-league, and some of those leagues are shut down, so it shuts the window for us to get rid of players as well. So it's a difficult time, and but this team, I think, has got a chance for today, and today's the only thing we can look at. That's what's in front of us. I think the other interesting thing is the next 4 games, including this one. We've talked before about we're losing to the bottom teams, which we have lost to the bottom 4, but actually the next 4 games are equally all winnable. Grimsby are bottom in the form charts. Port Vale are in the bottom 7. Colchester are in the bottom 8. So there are teams that we've got to beat. The next 4 are all in the bottom 7 on the form. So get a good result today, and who knows? In 4 more games, we could optimistically be looking at a few more points on the board.
You mentioned the average age of the squad there, and obviously we know that previously, at the start of the season, we were a very young side. We've got a bit of experience in there now. You've obviously mentioned Karajan and obviously Howard in goal, and it does look a lot more experience with Taft as well, I suppose. Do you think Cox can still use that as an excuse that he's still a young side? He does say that after games, doesn't he? He still kind of mentions that we've got a lot of young lads. Do you think that excuse is maybe wearing a little bit thin now, given the experience we've got?
I still think that's the mistake that we made. Quite honestly, I wonder what the strategy was. We released 13 players. I can understand why, because we needed to get the wage bill down. Gone are the days when I was on the board and Mike Ashley, we beat Newcastle, and Mike Ashley said, good side there. And I said, we just had to raise our wage bill to just over 2 million. And he said, 2 million? I've got 2 players, I pay 2 million. So money's a funny thing in football. And I can see why, Peter Swan had to look at the books and say, we've got to get the wage bill down. I do think that the likes of Levi Sutton we could have kept, and there's a couple of others that maybe we should have taken a gamble on. And I do think now that we've got more experience on the pitch, I think that is becoming a little bit thin. I think we're all getting a little bit fed up of hearing it, because they've now got 23 or more games under their belt, and they should be learning, and we should be playing the style of football that we were promised, and we should be winning more points than we are.
In terms of the players coming in, obviously we've just talked about the transfer, and as unfortunately we're sort of looking down the leagues for players to take, get players off our hands. But obviously, national leagues, they've shut up a little bit now, haven't they? I think they're suspended for 2 or 3 weeks, I think. So that will take us to the end of January. In terms of like when you were at the club and how the transfer windows worked, obviously it's quite common to see deals done late on, or even on the day, quite late on the transfer deadline day. I think from a fan's perspective, at the minute, we're sort of feeling like maybe nothing really else is going to happen. We mentioned that they were looking at a striker. It's probably not going to happen. That seems to have gone quiet. Do you think it's likely we are going to get players in, or do you think that's pretty much it now and we are going to have to basically limp to the end of the season with what we've got?
I can never really understand the transfer window, because if, I would have always thought that if you need players, you go early and you try and get them in. So you've got 4 more weeks to bed them and get better results from the club. I do actually think that sometimes the theatre of the last few days, the last few hours, some chairmen love that. They like it. The clubs like it, to be seen to be, making last minute acquisitions. For me, I would have liked us to have seen somebody in the building before this game. But I still think that Neil Cox and Peter Swan are looking for 1, possibly 2 players, but I don't think that they'll do it as a knee-jerk. I think they know who they want, and if that's not going to happen, then we might be disappointed. I don't think they'll just bring somebody in for the sake of it, because that would be silly, given the fact that we've got this ceiling on our wages.
You mentioned there about obviously Neil Cox and Lillis, and I think let's go a little bit more general now. So obviously we've had quite a few, managers over the last couple of years, but obviously Neil Cox, local lad, you probably know Mark Lillis as well, won't you? What did you make of that appointment when they were announced last summer?
I think, like everybody else, we're really excited because we do, we're lads from Scunthorpe and we like to look after our own, don't we? And it's interesting because when you look back from 1997 to 2012, we had 4 managers in 15 years, and they'd all had something to do with the club. Brian Laws, he went to the Premier League. Nigel Adkins, he was our physio, he went to the Premier League. Ian Barraclough, he was a lad, played for Scunthorpe, and he loved Scunthorpe, and he went and is now an international manager in Ireland. And Alan Nill played for Scunthorpe, and he's gone to become assistant at Sheffield United in the Premier League. So, we had 4 managers, and they all had something to do with the club. In the last sort of 8 years, we've had sort of 12 different people sitting at the desk, albeit some of them twice, and only really Mark Robbins has gone on to do bigger and better things. So I think the fact that we've brought in Neil Cox, who's a Scunthorpe lad, lives locally, played for the club, has got lots of experience, and Booner, Mark Lillis, we all remember him running around with the flag, wowing the supporters. I think we thought we'd got the dream team there, and I still do believe that if we can just put some results together, their confidence will go up and their belief will take us to the right place. So, I think it was the right decision. Hindsight's a really good thing. We could have said, should we have sacked Alexander? I had my opinions. The chairman has his opinions, and he owns the club, so he makes the decisions. But I just hope that he sticks with Neil Cox a little bit longer, especially if we get a good result today.
Yeah, obviously we spoke to Peter Swan earlier in the week, and he did say that we can't keep sacking managers, and it did sound as though Cox has got his back in long term. Do you think that's the case, or do you think if we lose today and it's not a great performance and we don't see a bit of passion and a bit of effort from the players, do you think he might be at risk?
Well, from what Peter Swan said on his interview with you, I would certainly think he's not going to get sacked after today's game. if he does, then it would be a strange twist from what he was saying. And I think what we need is that word consistency. And it's too easy to keep firing people and hoping that you're going to get a bounce from it. And we've tried that several times before, and it hasn't worked. And listening to Neil Cox, he talks well. He's got the back of the players have got his back. He hasn't lost the dressing room or anything like that. He's got young lads who are probably lacking in confidence, who keep getting beaten, and it's hard for him. But I just don't know who else would come in that could do a better job straight away. And you also got to say, looking at the money side, Peter Swan spent a lot of money. The club's, has got quite a lot of debt, really. And does it want to start paying off more people in the hope that it might bring somebody better in? I think Neil Cox is safe for a little while yet.
You mentioned there about the confidence of players, and I think that has been quite evident, certainly with some more than others. I think, Tyler Cordner was probably an example of that, even though he's not with us now. I think he was a player that needs a bit of a good run. Do you think that is, a big part of why it's not working so much at the minute? Or do you think it's in terms of tactics, or is it just some of the players that are just not up to the level? Why do you think, or is it a combination of all the things? Why do you think it's sort of not quite clicking at the minute? Because as you said earlier on, we're over halfway now, and this season is going very quick, and we're only 3 points off bottom of the league.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. And I think it could be a bit of there. I think the biggest problem we've got is we haven't got a leader on the pitch. If you look back at any of our times, when we've always had somebody there that's been controlling the troops, that's been passing on information, that's been leading leading from the front, if you like. And that, you look around the team, and okay, you've got Clark at right back, who's been injured as well. And have we really got that leader there? And I think it's true to say, and I think Neil has probably said it as well, some of our players aren't good enough. But we've got what we've got, and we've suffered some injuries as well. So it's a bit of all of that, really. You've also sometimes got to take players out of the firing line, because consistently getting beaten, your confidence is absolutely shot to pieces, and you don't perform. And I think that's been quite evident with some of the players that aren't now with the club. Probably just didn't have the stomach for it. And what we've got to do now is get a couple of wins so that the lads get their confidence back, they get their mojo back, and they look forward to games because they know they've got a chance of winning. And hopefully that starts today.
I think a lot's been made of the club's transfer policy and the transfer committee and players that were brought in the summer, and arguably before that as well, not quite being good enough and up to the level, not for kind of playing straight away. Maybe in a couple of years they might have improved and might be ready, but at the moment, we need players that are ready now and kind of to come straight into the team. Obviously the fans have been really critical of how players have been signed, so just kind of interested to know what happened. When you were at the club, when you were on the board, how did we scout players? Obviously Turnbull was heavily involved, but did Steve Wharton get involved in signing players? Apart from actually signing them off and paying for them, did he ever kind of recommend any players, or was it purely kind of the manager, scouts, and people like that?
No, Steve Wharton was amazing, because he'd jump in his car, and a funny story was he jumped in his car to sign Martin Patterson. And bless Steve, his Bentley was only firing on 3 cylinders, but rather than cry over his soup, he carried on going with 3 cylinders on his Bentley at 35 miles an hour to Stoke. Steve, was determined to get the players. Steve was getting good information on players from his source, but wouldn't buy them himself. He would talk to Brian. When I went to watch Billy Sharp at Rushden and Diamonds, it wasn't any me signing him. It was me bringing it to the attention of Steve and Brian, and they would make the decisions. But I think, again, because you've got consistency with the manager, Brian Laws knew so many people, and Brian was known as a really good manager, operating a very good ship at Scunthorpe. Steve Wharton, I think Steve Wharton ran the best football club in the lower leagues for many, many years. Certainly wasn't a hobby by any stretch. Otherwise, we wouldn't have got Billy Sharp or Gary Hooper or Martin Patterson or Peter Beagrie or Jermaine Beckford or Henry Lansbury. We were serious at what we were doing. And that was because there was stability. Everybody could look at us and say, wow, they look after their players, they blood them well, they look after them well, they get them into good digs. And we were known as a place to send good players. Jack Cork came from Chelsea. he's gone on to bigger and better things because we looked after the players. And when you haven't got consistency in management, you don't build any of those longer term relationships. It's always a bit knee jerk and, who can we get today? It's urgent sort of thing. And that doesn't build trust or longevity, which is what we tried to do in the past.
Another thing I think from the interview that was quite noticeable to us was the comments that they're saying that the chairman, he'd been to training certainly this week because he was talking about how Jordan Hallam was doing. I know Neil Cox referenced that in the interview. Now, obviously, football changes and, the way the club run is different and everything like that. But what about in your day, was training something that was just left to the management and the team and, that was it? They do their thing out there and, the board was separate, or did you and, Mr. Wharton, did you go down and have a look at it sometimes? How did that go on?
No, we didn't interfere. At the end of the day, that would just be putting more pressure on a manager, especially when you haven't necessarily been getting the best results. It's easy, and you probably wouldn't mind when you've got a few wins and you're having a laugh and there's people joking on the training ground and it's all fun. That's probably, Steve Wharton might have popped down there and engaged in something with them, but certainly didn't interfere or watch the training sessions, and neither did I. We'd go into the changing rooms at the end of each game and congratulate the players or commiserate with the players and be positive. But no, I think any chairman going and watching the training sessions, but it is 95% his club, so he's got a vested interest, so he's every right to do it. I'm sure he wasn't interfering with what training was going on, but I would have thought that a chairman's presence at a time when the manager's trying to get his players motivated probably wasn't overly helpful. If it was a regular every day of the week occurrence, probably wasn't overly helpful. Their freedom of speech and the way they acted probably wouldn't be as natural as it would have been if he wasn't there. But, it's his club, so he can do what he wants.
When we were promoted to the Championship, we obviously had a relatively small budget compared to some of the other teams in the league. Yeah. You look at it now, obviously the salary caps come in, so everyone is pretty much having to spend the same amount. You can't buy the league anymore, I guess. Obviously football's kind of moved on from when you were at the club. But we can spend 1.5 million at the moment. Obviously, we've maybe not spent that wisely. Maybe we've got too big a squad. Maybe some of the players we brought in aren't good enough. I suppose what we've done in the past and under Steve Wharton proves that you can have a successful side with a relatively small budget.
Yeah, you're right. It has changed, and I do feel for the chairman in that respect. He's very wealthy. His family's very wealthy in his own rights, but that doesn't mean to say that he's allowed to sort of go and spend it on a whim. I mean, we got some very, very good players on loan, and I think that that matched with the good players that we'd got in the team. The Henry Lansburys from Arsenal, the Jermaine Beckfords from Leeds, Steve McLean from Rangers. Those type of players were good players to bring in as additional players, and we got the likes of Gary Hooper, Andy Keogh, and I keep mentioning Billy Sharp, and those players were just fantastic for us, and they weren't on stupid money either. We just had a strategy that we wrote a strategy when we brought Brian Laws back after his very short bit of gardening leave that he had before he went to Sheffield and Burnley. And Steve Wharton and I wrote a strategy for the next 5 years of the club. And that was to get players in that were going to be bought at sensible money that would be an investment in us. In other words, we looked at it almost as if we're footballer investment agency rather than a football club. And that's why we ended up, people were mentioning players to us like Billy and like Andy Keogh and like Gary Hooper that weren't in the first team at other clubs, to be fair. And that proved to be the right strategy. And all I would like to see right now is, given where we are, is what is the plan? What is the plan? We can't just keep saying, well, we've got what we've got. We've got to actually have a plan to turn this around. If it was a normal business, and you were underperforming in the market and your sales were down, you'd have a plan to turn it around. You'd do more marketing, or you'd change your salespeople, or you do whatever. And I'd just like to see more of a bones of a plan that is probably evident, but I'd like to just understand what it was.
Yeah, I mean, Swan mentioned to us in the week he wasn't thinking about relegation, and I think he kind of dismissed the whole idea of relegation, obviously saying there's well, I don't know if he confirmed that there weren't any release clauses and things like that in contracts. I think he was just completely dismissing the thought of relegation, didn't really want to speak about it. And I think on the back of that, he's been getting a bit of stick this week. You know, there's no plan in place. To me, I mean, although he's not kind of talking about it, surely he must have a plan. You know, if the worst does happen and we find ourselves in the bottom two and there is a relegation this season, because obviously the National League still may be voided, surely he has a plan to kind of move the club forward if that did happen.
I think he's absolutely right not to be talking about relegation. I think that was just, if you get that regularly into your vocabulary with half the season gone, you're already defeated. You know, I know sometimes we laugh when you get managers up near the top of the Premier League saying, no, we've not looked at the league table. It's nonsense. Of course, Mr. Swan knows where we are in the league and he knows what he'll do if we get relegated. But to be talking about it, to be bringing that sort of worst possible scenario into his vocabulary would be the wrong thing to do. Obviously he will be hoping and praying and looking at bringing people in to try and avoid that situation with Neil Cox. But he's right not to be mentioning that R word, especially as devastating as it would be going out of the Football League.
We'll start to wrap up pretty soon because obviously match kicks off in 15 minutes. As we're talking about the relegation and everything there, you mentioned earlier on that obviously, the season's, it's fast moving along. We've played the teams in and around us. We've lost to a lot of them. Do you think with what we've got now, let's say that we don't bring anybody in the transfer window, do you think with what we've got now is enough to keep us up this season?
I think I'm not avoiding the question. I think it's going to be interesting to see how we do today, because today is a bit of a cup final for us. He's putting an attacking team out of the majority of the lads that are going to be available. We're going to get Kevin Van Veen back in a few weeks. Olamola's going to be coming back soon. So hopefully that will bring some good news for us. I think the other thing is that, we've got equally as many points from the teams in the top half of the table as we have from the bottom half of the table. It's easy to say we've lost to the bottom four. We've lost, to 5 out of the bottom 9, but we've won 5 of the bottom 9. But we've got as many points beating the top half of the table as we have in the bottom. So we've got to remain optimistic. People might think I'm nuts, but we've got no choice. We've got what we've got. We might get some of our injured players back. We might get a couple in. But I can't see that there's too many. I think there's 2, 3, 4, 5 teams worse than us in this division. And I'm sure we're going to be okay.
And then just to finish off with, have you got a score prediction for today?
Right. Well, we've only drawn 2 games all season, so I'm going to go for a draw. And I'm going to go 1-1.
I think it could be 0-0. Matt, how about you?
I think a draw looks likely. I think it's going to be quite cagey, but I think, we mentioned earlier on, if we can get the attacking players into the game, I think, if Issa has a good game and we get him on the ball and they don't double up on him, I think they will. I think, like Simon mentioned earlier on, at their place, they definitely saw Issa as probably our main threat and tried to kind of nullify that, and I think they did. I think if we can get him on the ball, I think if we can utilise Green's pace a little bit more and kind of help Loft, get players in and around him, I think we may just nick it. But I don't know. The players need to turn up first. I think if we turn up, I think we might get something, because let's be honest. I mean, Grimsby at their spot were pretty dire. So I think it's hopefully both teams are a lot better than that day and a bit more of a spectacle, because that was a really poor game to watch. But hopefully we can nick it.
And I think we'll probably leave it there because, like I say, 10 minutes to kick off. Simon, thanks for coming back on. Really interesting. And thank you very much for everyone for listening to this one. 10 minutes to the match. We'll be back for podcasts this weekend, probably, or Monday if it's not. And also, we have got plans for an In Conversation next week, and it's a pretty good one. So we'll see you on the next podcast pretty soon.